Right, in the last video we elaborated this ideal forager life. So when did it all go wrong? And it happened really perhaps much further long ago than you might think. It happened more like 60,000 years ago indeed, because it was that time that the human race was being very successful. It was multiplying and it had to keep searching for more living space. And so it was, over the years, human beings spread out over Africa. They finally made it across into the Middle East. They didn't turn left yet because the Neanderthals were there and they were a bit of a problem. But they carried on into Asia, and they very quickly got into Australia. They populated Asia, and then they finally made it across the Bering Straits into North America, something like 12 to 15,000 years ago. There's still a little bit of a debate about what time that happened, but they filled up the Americas very fast. From the time they came in, right in there in northern Canada, up there in Alaska, they filled up all the way down to Patagonia in the south within the space of about 1,500 years. So it was that by that time, 12 to 15,000 years ago, the world was filled up. Everybody's still needing 200 square miles of living space. And they were still multiplying, and they were fighting each other for living room. Until one day, one group, about 11,000 years ago, in the area we now kind of call Kazakhstan, which is the area north of Iraq, in the region of Turkey, that kind of area, one group discovered how to live on 2 square miles instead of 200 square miles. And they did it by taking control of their food supply. Instead of wandering around, taking their chances as to what was there would be all right for them, they made sure that what they could find was going to be something that they could use. So it was that they planted. But there were 2 difficulties with that. First of all, they had to reduce right down the variety of plants that they were going to use, from something like 100 down to just 3 or 4. And secondly, they didn't plant what they would normally be eating. They planted what it was possible to plant, what it was possible to cultivate, possible to protect from predators, possible to harvest and use, and which they could then store through the winter periods. And so it was that for the first time in the history of the human species, completely new food groups entered the diet. For the first time in the history of the human species, people began to eat birdseed. Now, I'm deliberately using a provocative term, but I'm going to put up a timeline where we see this new food group entering the diet. Here it is. Wheat and barley, grains. Grains are not something to which human beings are naturally adapted. One of the things we have to understand is that grains are grass seeds, and grass seeds belong to this vast class of plants called monocot plants. Human beings are naturally adapted to eating dicot plants. Why might this be a problem then with the grass seeds? Just exactly what is going on here. Well, the main problem with grass seed is that it is starchy. And starches are nothing other than sugar molecules joined together, and the body unzips them back into sugar in nanoseconds. But on one condition, that you cook them. Human beings don't have the digestive arrangements, they don't have the enzymes to digest raw starches. And that, right there, that gives the lie to the idea that they might be a product to which human beings are naturally adapted. We're not. We don't have the physical ability to digest them in their normal state. But coming back to this idea of starches and sugar, hey, just think of it this way. A slice of bread is equivalent to 4 teaspoonfuls of sugar. So you eat a slice of toast, it hits the bloodstream just as fast as that sugar, and you're off on this high blood sugar spikes. And worse than that, you're onto this hyperinsulinemia that I talked about in an earlier video, with all the mischief that that is causing. So right here, by starting to eat grains, we are giving ourselves these huge problems. And it started with those first farmers too. We know from the archaeological record that they started to suffer from depressed stature. They started to suffer from bone diseases, from arthritis, from increased infant deaths. And that is just what we can get from the archaeological record. We now know that they are behind all kinds of other diseases, including brain diseases such as autism, such as ADHD, epilepsy, even Alzheimer's. We're not saying it's the only factor, but they are a factor in these kinds of diseases. They're involved in autoimmune diseases. They're involved in a whole range of problems, which we'll come on to in just a second. So we've dealt with the starches and their sugar impact, but more than that, grains are micronutrient poor. And you will remember from an earlier video that I talked about how human beings are designed to work on a very rich micronutrient diet. By eating grains, and when I'm talking about grains, I mean not only wheat and barley, but all the ones that came along since then, the rice, the rye, the oats, the corn or maize, and so forth. They're all tarred with the same brush. And not only am I talking about grains in general terms, I'm talking about everything we make from them. The breakfast cereals, the pastas, the pizzas, the breads, the croissants, and the cakes, and so on and so forth. They're all tarred with the same brush. So they're micronutrient poor, and by eating these, we are shouldering aside the kind of plant food that would have provided those micronutrients. Thirdly, grains are not alkalizing. Again, you'll remember from an earlier video that it talks about how the human biochemistry is designed to work on a broadly neutral phase between acid or alkali intake. And it achieves that by balancing, if you like, the acidifying effect of eating animal matter by the alkalizing effect of plant food. But it has to be the right kind of plant food. Cereals are not the right kind of plant food because they're not alkalizing. In fact, they're slightly acidifying. So by eating grains, we are therefore increasing the acidifying effect of the diet. We are shouldering aside the kinds of plant food that would have provided that alkalizing effect. Fourthly, grains contain antinutrients. Now I need to explain something here. All plants produce plant poisons, which are designed to fight off plant predators like funguses, bacteria, and so forth. They produce what amounts to insecticides or pesticides. Now, plant predators develop resistance to those plant poisons. Human beings are plant predators. They also have resistance to the kinds of plant toxins that they met in their evolutionary past. But we never met grains in our evolutionary past. So we don't have resistance to the kind of plant poisons that are in grains. And we've only recently, in the last 20 years or so, begun to identify these, to find out what they do, and to realize the kind of mischief that they're getting up to. And these plant poisons have names like lectins, alpha amylase inhibitors, alkyl resorcinols, protease inhibitors, and so forth. And they're doing a lot of mischief. Just to give you an idea, one of the things they do is depress human growth hormone. Partly explains why these people suddenly lost stature back then in the early farming revolution. But you might argue, well, I'm grown up now, why would I worry about human growth hormone? Well, every night your body is secreting human growth hormone so that the cells renew themselves. And if you're not doing that as it is intended, then your cells aren't renewing themselves, you're aging faster, your tissues aren't renewing themselves, they're aging and are not working at full efficiency. These plant poisons do things like make your colon more leaky, allowing bacteria and funguses to escape into the bloodstream, into the lymphatic system, undermining the immune system, undermining our general health. They do things like attack brain function. This is where they get involved with autism, where they get involved with schizophrenia and so on. They interfere with DNA maintenance. Our DNA is constantly being broken and being repaired, and they're incredibly clever and delicate mechanisms repairing that little spiral, that double helix. And if it doesn't happen as it should do, that cell becomes a mutant, and that means it either dies, and if you're unlucky, it also becomes cancerous. So there's a myriad ways in which these plant poisons are undermining our health. And there's one final antinutrient that probably most of us are familiar with, that is gluten. Sometimes people come to me and they say, oh, my doctor's just diagnosed me with this disease. I've got celiac disease. And I say to them, it's not a disease. It's normal to react badly to gluten. Everybody reacts to gluten. It's just that only in a certain number of people does it become so obvious that a doctor notices it and says you have this disease. And for the moment, their main remedy is to say stop eating gluten. Actually, this is something that everybody should be doing, not eating gluten, because even if we're tolerating it, the body isn't actually enjoying it, because gluten down there is doing mischief. When you're eating it, for example, it gets down into the colon, it is stripping off all those little microvilli that are so essential to absorb nutrients and to carry out their body functions, to actually transmit nutrients backwards and forwards, deal with immune system cells and so on. It makes the colon more leaky. Those tight junctions become more leaky, allowing the bacteria and funguses to get through into the bloodstream, creating the mischief, depressing the immune system. It attacks bone building. With gluten, you're more likely to be getting osteoporosis. It is a factor in poor bone health. We'll come to that again in a future video. It attacks brain function. It's a factor in Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, ADHD. Hey, this is where it's all coming from. So the bottom line on gluten is, this is basically a plant poison. It is poisonous to human beings. We've no business eating it, and we'd all be far better off if you never put it in the diet. So that is one more reason why cereals are basically to be avoided. The bottom line on grains is, hey, they're for the birds. In the next video, we'll come on to another big problem in the human diet.
Everything Geoff Bond says in these videos and a whole lot more is to be found in his book, Deadly Harvest. Check it out at www.deadlyharvest.com.